Hey everybody, I am sitting here in Salt Lake City, en route back east, and you can see the mountains in the background there. Um, it had occurred to me that I haven't really done a straight up electoral politics kind of update or video or commentary in quite a while, and I think that's for good reason, because the presidential campaign per se has really diminished in terms of its stature or standing in the minds of most voters, I would say, at least compared to 2016. When 2016, if you can sort of cast your mind back to then, it seemed like all anybody could talk about was the election and the ascendance of Trump. Obviously, it was a very new and quote-unquote invigorating electoral cycle where you had a lot of volatility in terms of an ideological rupture that was clearly underway in both parties to some extent, and then just the persona or personage of Trump was clearly novel. But this time, the trends have stabilized. We sort of, in a way, reverted back to the norm just in terms of the ideological contours of the cycle, and the range of political possibilities that briefly appeared in 2016 has constricted. And 2020 is in this weird set of circumstances where it almost doesn't seem like the main show in town in terms of the election. When you have a pandemic, when you have a cultural revolution style upheaval in Salt Lake City. And I'll flip around my camera here for a second. Can I flip it? I don't know where the flip option is. That's weird. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so just in this little neighborhood that I'm in Salt Lake City, you walk around, like down the street that way, there are a bunch of houses with the Black Lives Matter, signage up, and there were protests, and ones that had to be dispersed with riot police, if I'm not mistaken. And I know actually I'm not mistaken. That did happen, I think, in June. So just the scale and the gravity of a pandemic coupled with however you want to characterize this protest / riot / cultural revolution style upheaval makes it such that the election per se has been superseded in terms of its role in the public mind. That's not to say that the election is not going to happen. Clearly it is, unless Trump truly goes out of his mind and delays it. I mean, I think when he tweeted out a few days ago, asking whether he should delay the election as a result of uncertainties around mail-in voting, it was kind of just a troll. It was kind of just trolling. I don't think he even has, even if he wanted to quote delay the election, it's not even within his powers. It's or in other words, it's not in his powers to unilaterally decree that. I guess because the states, 51 states and territories, 50 states in the District of Columbia, all are charged with conducting their own individual election on the first Tuesday in November on a quadrennial basis for presidential electors. That's a constitutionally prescribed function that is outside of the purview of the president to directly control. I mean, I guess he could come up with some strategy to sort of pressure governors and state legislatures or something to, I don't know, institute some kind of delay, but almost without, that's almost impossible to fathom. Um, but of course, him just tweeting out a vague suggestion about it was enough to send the commentary into a blithering tailspin as usual, where they were declaring that fascism is upon us. I thought it was already upon us. It's hard to keep track. Anyway, so that's sort of the context around the state of the election now. And on top of that, I mean, and you can't, they're not campaigning in person. The conventions are canceled, for all intents and purposes. For the Republican convention, I just saw that there's going to be no journalists permitted at the convention. There's no delegates. I mean, these are basically just, multi-day Zoom meetings now for both parties. And, so the trip that I would normally take every convention time around the country, at least for my individual purposes, has been supplanted by this trip that I've taken over the past 6 weeks or so, to go to post-riot areas, and areas where there are still quote-unquote riots underway, like Portland. Okay, so that's sort of the odd, unusual state of affairs in relation to the circumstances that are operative for this current election, and yet we still have this whole routine where everybody's speculating about who the vice presidential pick was going to be. Like, this is one of the more standard, customary exercises every 4 years. And I was thinking about my impressions 4 years ago when the vice presidential picks were announced for both Trump and Hillary. I remember thinking and saying at the time, you can go find my tweets if you really want to, if you're really that invested in adjudicating my judgmental abilities. You can go find that in summer 2016, I guess it was July. I said that the Pence pick for Trump was politically smart. So leave aside a value judgment, leave aside any kind of normative analysis. In terms of just sheer political strategy, the Mike Pence pick was smart for Trump because he had to consolidate elements of the Republican coalition at the time that might have still been wary of him, the most conspicuous of which was truly ideologically committed, religiously devout evangelicals, not just cultural evangelicals who identify as such and maybe go to church occasionally, but I'm talking about the zealous, devoted evangelical believers who have a very powerful political network and might have had some apprehension about Trump still, even after he secured the nomination in 2016. And so Pence mollified them to some extent as somebody who emerged from the sort of institutional evangelical political apparatus associated with the Republican Party. And so I thought that was a sound move for Trump, politically speaking, and sure enough, it seemed to work. I remember going around in North Carolina just before the election and talking to voters, some of whom told me that they, as Christians, they had doubts about Trump, but Pence gave them some degree of confidence, such that they were willing to vote for the ticket. Whereas for Tim Kaine, what did that bring to Hillary politically? What advantage did that confer to her? I guess the idea was maybe because it was a white guy, that white guys would want to vote for Hillary, but Tim Kaine was just like, he was just a non-entity. He didn't add anything to the winning electoral formula for Hillary. So I guess it was just sort of a governing pick. She thought that he would be the best vice president, that he would, he was sort of an emblem for the party. In a way, he had been the former DNC chair. He had been considered by Obama for vice president in 2008. So he was just sort of a fixture at the sort of upper echelons of the party power structure. And, that's what Hillary, I guess, calculated was in her best interest to elevate, but, clearly it did not work. And so now we have Biden in the midst of his selection process. I would assume it's probably going to happen at least probably a week or so before, in the week ahead of the quote convention, which is not really a convention this year. As I said, it's a bizarre virtual convention type thing. We have this, selection process, which is traditional in a way, but also not traditional, because he stated ahead of time that it would be a woman. Everybody kind of just assumes that it must, for some reason, be a woman of color. And so that's sort of the priors that people are going into this whole discussion with. So if it's not a woman of color, that's sort of gonna be a controversy unto itself. There are gonna be several news cycles where Democrats, maybe representatives for Biden, or even Biden himself, have to explain how it is that in this moment he did not select a woman of color, particularly a black woman. I mean, the color that you are is not really that material. Apparently, it's a particular type of color. And so all of that has, according to the sort of pundit wisdom, worked very much to the advantage of Kamala Harris, who's leading the betting markets, if you go check that. And I would view this Kamala Harris pick in the same vein that I viewed the Tim Kaine pick, should it happen. I don't see what she adds in terms of expanding the Biden electoral coalition. Number one, she does not have any intrinsic, I'm sorry to say, connection with black voters in key swing states. Just because of her skin tone doesn't necessarily mean that she is going to be a motivating force for voters who the Democratic ticket needs in order to be successful. It has to do with her personal background, I guess to some extent her racial composition. She's a lawyer from Berkeley, okay? Not a whole lot in common there with, I don't know, a bus driver in Milwaukee or a hairdresser in Atlanta. She's not an American descendant of slaves. ADOS is the term that you sometimes see. So it's just a different cultural position than other potential nominees, like Val Demings, Karen Bass, who people have been talking about a lot this past week. Even Keisha Lance Bottoms. I think any one of those three would be a superior choice politically for Biden than Kamala. And Kamala, I mean, did people forget that she was hyped to a massive extent during the primaries, to the point where Nate Silver and friends declared her the obvious frontrunner, and she got all kinds of unearned pundit accolades. She kind of represented in the minds of pundits what they wanted to see the Democratic Party look like in the age of Trump. As somebody who's sort of, roughly around the center of the party coalition, but has the identity characteristics that they find to be most suitable as providing a contrast to Trump and the Republican Party. And what happened? She had a coordinated hit job ambush on Biden at that first debate, where she, said, "I don't think you're a racist," but meaning she was accusing him of being a racist. And it proved to be a sugar high. She was proclaimed, the clear victor in that altercation. And then what happened? She went down the polls, largely because black voters in key states did not find it palatable. That little stunt she pulled on Biden proved to be more popular among white voters. White voters like that more than black voters did. Okay, which is hilarious. But not, in this time of, when you talk about these sets of issues, there's irony always layered on top of irony. And so that's her history, and yet somehow, because of this sort of twist of fate, it just kind of presumed that she's almost entitled to this position, which is just odd. I think if Biden were to pick her, the ticket may well still win because there's just enough of a cushion there, and Trump has his own problems with a crashing economy, a pandemic, and just being perceived to be an agent of chaos in his own right, who hasn't consolidated the advantages of incumbency. But I don't see the Kamala pick there being a net addition. I do see it potentially even being a net subtraction. Whereas there are others who I could see being a net addition, like Val Demings in particular. Val Demings is who I would pick if I were just a strategic political advisor. Unless there's something crazy in her closet that we don't know about, that would be my pick. But then again, does anyone really care at this point? I don't know, I guess, but it is sort of interesting because the level of caring is probably a little bit lesser than you would have expected given everything else that's going on. So that's some banal thoughts I thought I would share on this pleasant Sunday afternoon from Salt Lake City. Again, I'm on my way home now. A piece on Portland that's coming out hopefully Monday or Tuesday. So I'll be sure to keep you abreast of that. In the meantime, you know the drill. Stay safe, stay cool.